Hey, folks, welcome back to episode 2, as it were, of the Carl Zahn Show, or as I affectionately call it, the podcast. So as we kind of hone in on the formula of the show, you have to bear with us here for the first few episodes while I kind of figure out what we want to do. So we'll start today before we get to our main subject, which is going to be migrant crime, and of course the recent Lakin Riley, the murder of this young girl in Georgia, which was horrific. And I have some background for that. But before we get into that, do a little bit of lighthearted stuff and a couple of possible weekly segments that we may add to the show here. So a few interesting developments in the news last week, one of which was I found striking was Nancy Pelosi was on some news program and called the former President Donald Trump grotesque, which I just found fascinating coming from a woman who literally looks like she should be nibbling on cheese behind a washing machine in a basement somewhere. So for her to call Donald Trump grotesque, I just found completely amusing. Nancy Pelosi looks like a Pixar creation that got left on the cutting room floor and then later somehow came back to life during some Ambien-induced sleepwalk. I mean, what a horrific woman. And for her to call Donald Trump grotesque, who could also be a Pixar creation, but at least he's fun and smart. But for her to call Donald Trump grotesque would be like Steve Buscemi commenting on someone's dental work. And no offense to Steve Buscemi, I love your work. But it's just... this is the world we live in now, where Nancy Pelosi, who has always struck me as a very marginal intellect and nearly as insipid as Rachel Maddow, who could, by the way, be replaced with a helium balloon and a wig. It's about how deep that intellect goes. So that's in the news this week. Nancy Pelosi has branded Donald Trump grotesque, but I would argue he's grotesque in a fun way. Other interesting stuff this week. So Google's Gemini AI chatbot, little bit of a bumpy rollout as it depicted Vikings as African Americans and Asians. And when someone posed the question to Google's Gemini AI chatbot about what would be more harmful to humanity, a nuclear holocaust or somebody misgendering Caitlyn Jenner, the chatbot responded that that would be a difficult decision because both of those presented existential human threats. So it's interesting to me that the state of Florida, and I could be wrong on this, but they have either introduced legislation or passed legislation to make social media forbidden for kids under 16, which I think is appropriate. I also think it's about 19 years too late, but better late than never. But it's amazing to me that we're just finding out now, like 16, 17, 18 years later, after cell phones became ubiquitous and all our kids have them and all our kids have access to all the vile things that are available to them on that now, apparently, as a country, we're going to go stumbling into the AI future, with all the caution of drunken gypsies. I don't see anything but trouble with this whole AI robot thing. Mark that on your calendar, and we'll talk about it 10 years from now. But the rollout of this Google thing, and it's so flagrantly obvious that the programmers are the robots. It's, for these robots are supposed to be the future, and this depth, galactic depth of intellect, and yet right out of the gate, it struggles with which would be more damaging, transgendering or misgendering, I guess. A little behind on all the jargon here. Misgendering Caitlyn Jenner or a nuclear holocaust. I think that's a pretty easy call for most people, but I could be wrong. Other interesting stuff this week. Mitt Romney comes out and says that he will not support Donald Trump. And again, it's very typical of the Republican Party. Most people know conservatives, I mean, we can fuck up a free lunch, and we probably will do that to this next election. Everyone is saying we got to coalesce. And then you have a guy like Mitt Romney who presents himself as this sophisticated sweater vest, scarf across the shoulder, but most notably was known for many years ago carrying his golden lab on the roof of his station wagon on his way to a vacation in Canada. So I don't know, call me crazy. Any guy who straps his beloved family pet to the roof of a station wagon when you drive 80 miles down the road, call me crazy, but that's not sophistication where I come from. People I consider sophisticated, a little bit deeper than that. Probably wouldn't guess it by the way they dress, but we're New Hampshire people, and I know guys who spent their whole lives in dairy farmer coveralls who were far more sophisticated than Mitt Romney or Gavin Newsom or any of these people who hold themselves up as these deep intellects. And if you ever have a question about that, ask yourself who you'd rather be stranded on an island with, Mitt Romney or some dairy farmer from New Hampshire, because I'll tell you what, Mitt Romney would have your thigh on a barbecue spit the first morning that you ran out of food, and some dairy farmer from New Hampshire would figure out a way to keep you both alive and get yourself off the island. So, we all have our own take on sophistication. That would be mine. Another interesting thing here in the wake of everything that's going on with the country, and this has been going on for some time, this struggle with what to call illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, illegal immigrants, illegal migrants. Never been that important to me. My issue has always been if you entered the country illegally, you broke the law. It's fairly simple. That's not a racist notion. It wouldn't matter to me if these were blonde-haired, blue-eyed people from Norway and Sweden who were coming here illegally and committing crimes and living off of our generous social programs. So it's not a race thing for me at all. It's a policy thing. And, you hear so much about equity in this world. Where's the equity in the people who take the 6 or 7 years and tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to come here legally and properly? And that can be for no other reason than they have a built-in moral obligation to do it correctly and do it legally, and they don't want the first thing they do going to America to be having broke a law. So where's the equity in that with those people trying to do it right? And it takes forever to do it. It takes ridiculously long, by the way. And that's something we might look at as a country, say, you know what? Let's make it more of an Ellis Island type thing, a little bit more streamlined and a little bit more controlled. And more people might come here legally if it wasn't so ridiculously arduous and convoluted to do it. But it isn't fair to those people and versus the people who come here and just float in over the border. That's my take on that. So in the wake of this, I've noticed in the last day or two here that the liberal press, liberal media now is rolling out a new word for these people. And I could be wrong, but my money is watch this grow and watch this become the accepted term now for these people. They're calling them newcomers. Well, newcomers to me sounds more like something that, two new people in a hot tub of 45 couples at a swingers party. You might call, here's a couple of newcomers. I have to tell you, from my standpoint, someone who breaks my door down in the middle of the night and rushes into my house in a home invasion is not a newcomer. I suppose you could call that a newcomer, but it's an alarmingly and ridiculously deceptive term, and this is what the liberals do now. So brace yourself for that. These people that are entering the country, and we're going to talk about that later in the show. The breadth of the show today is going to be Lakin Riley, this horrific murder in Georgia, and I have some background from a personal point of view to share with you on that. The young man who viciously beat to death a young medical student in Georgia to the point where she was disfigured almost beyond recognition, and that's as graphic as I want to get because I don't think that serves any of us, but I don't think we need to sugarcoat it. He's just a newcomer. Helium balloons and cake. Stunning where this country is going. It really is. One of the other things I am considering and probably will do here on the show, kind of my own personal thing here, is I want to do a weekly segment called Aviate Your Life. And I'll give you the background on that. I'm a longtime private pilot. I think I got licensed in 1989. So I fly small airplanes. And I've thought for a long time. So when I first got into it, I fell in love with it. Somebody bought me an introductory flight for my birthday. I took the flight. I fell in love with it. I signed up for flight school. And I really kind of fell in love with everything about aviation. I like the, aerodynamics, what creates lift, the whole history of aviation in this country. I like the weather that's associated with it, the navigation systems, and I like air traffic control, which is basically like learning another language. It's really cool. And we underestimate in this country how amazing our air travel system is. Like, people have no idea when you get on a commercial jet, all the moving parts, not just mechanically on the plane itself, but behind the scenes, navigation, air traffic control. As you study the history of it in this country, it's really, really fascinating. And then, of course, the other part of it I fell in love with was just the sheer beauty of it. I'm blessed to live in a really beautiful part of the country, and I can tell you from past experience, and you fly down the Maine coast on a summer night with a full moon, and at 2,000 feet, and I'll tell you, that will make a believer out of you. It's like a magic carpet ride. It's something surreal, and I find it completely cleansing for me. When I take a flight like that, everything goes away, and it puts you in a different space, and it really does help me, at least, appreciate the stunning beauty of our country, and it's been a great thing. And one of the things that I would, without boring people and getting too deep into aviation, one of the instruments in an airplane is called the HSI, which is your horizontal situation indicator, or we call it the artificial horizon. So it's a little round gauge. It's blue on top and brown on the bottom. Blue is sky, brown is dirt. And there's a little silhouette of the airplane in the middle that shows you your wing angle. And if you pitch the airplane up, the nose comes up into the blue. If you pitch it down, then the nose goes down. And this is how we fly in instrument conditions when you have no outside reference. But an old adage of pilots, like a parting greeting among pilots, is to keep the blue side up. And I kind of like to make that our parting moniker on the show. I think it applies to life. So keep the blue side up. Because if you got the brown side up, you're inverted and upside down, and you probably will be auguring into the ground shortly. And as they always say, it's not the drop, it's the fast stop that will get you. So back to my kind of things about aviation that I think mirror life, and I use this with my kids a lot to the point where they usually pinch their nose if I start going there, because it's another one of Dad's aviation lectures. But I think a good analogy is one of the first things you learn in flying airplanes is if you happen to get yourself into a difficult situation with severe turbulence, or you're in bad weather, or something has happened mechanically with the airplane where your workload is becoming full, the old adage is aviate, navigate, communicate. So first job is fly the airplane. Second job is don't get lost, know where you're going. Last job is to communicate to air traffic control. So job one is fly the airplane. And I think the country's in a place like that now. I would say that the primary thing is we're kind of a DC-3 and bad weather with an engine fire. And I think the job right now in the country is keep the wings level. And I think that's where the place that we're at in this country now, where, we're in some bumpy weather here, and we need to keep the wings level. And I think that's a great analogy of how aviation, many things about aviation fit into life itself, right down to the pre-flight. And we'll get into that, maybe do one every week or two, kind of a, here's how flying might equate to your life. You do a pre-flight, you check the airplane out, you think about what you're going to do, you think about your takeoff procedure, what you're going to do in an emergency, and it really applies to life. You could start every day like that and kind of think, okay, how am I going to manage my risks today? How am I going to make this the best flight, best day that I can, and minimize the opportunity for bad outcomes? And so I may or may not do that, but aviate your life. That may become one of our weekly little segments here. We talked about the Gemini AI chatbot rollout. It's unbelievable. So getting back to the nuts and bolts of today's podcast, videocast, whatever you want to call it, me yapping away. The subtitle to this, I decided to let's call it Resist the Mental Novocaine. That would be my subchapter for today's, the nuts and bolts of what we're going to talk about. Resist the mental Novocaine. I think it's human nature to become numb to repeated abuses, no matter what they might be in your life. We all know people who've been in abusive relationships who have a hard time getting out or go back for more, or you just generally get used to it. I think that's part of what's happening in our culture today is we're just getting used to it, and that's dangerous. Be honest with yourself. When you see breaking news of a school shooting, do you really pause anymore? I mean, I'll be honest, and I'm a bit ashamed to say it. I'll look at it, but it's kind of like next. And that's dangerous. And I think there is a numbing, and again, not blaming anybody because I'm, vulnerable to it myself. But there is a general numbing, like a Novocaine effect happening culturally where we become numb to the damage to our children, and we become numb to the fact that there's so many people out there trying to hurt our children, either predators sexually or in other ways that are even more sublime, I would submit to you. Lots of ways to hurt children that are not outwardly. You have to kind of look in the seams a little bit to see what's going on. But resist the mental Novocaine. I think it's important for us as a culture to stop and really try to get our head around what's happening here. Like I said, and I'm the same way. School shooting, some breaking news like that, it used to stop the clock. It used to be anything, that's all anybody would be talking about for several days was this horrific event. And let's be honest, these have become, they carry all the gravity of somebody hitting a cat. It's really sad. I really think we need to make a conscious effort to fight the numbing. One of the reasons the border issue is so hot, and as I said earlier in the program, for me at least, this is not about skin color. It's ridiculous that people even have to say that. You have to do a disclaimer for everything now. I'm not racist. I'm not a homophobe. I'm a pragmatist, as I said in the first episode. This whole point of this podcast is logic. I'll tell you my logic, how I arrive at how I feel and my positions on things. And if you can break that logic trail, I'm happy to listen. But I want people to know how so many people, and again, this goes to Trump's support, which I feel and have always felt is largely based on people who like common sense solutions to problems and common sense policies. Excuse me. So that being said, this whole mental Novocaine thing, and the latest tragedy here, as I mentioned, this 22-year-old Lakin Riley, med student in Georgia, The guy that murdered her was here illegally. My understanding is, and I'm not a journalist, so everything I say here is, I don't present it as fact. It's what I've heard. I assume it's true. And other than that, it's my opinion purely. But I have heard that this young man, Jose Antonio Ibarra, was here illegally, and then he was released in New York not too long ago after some other crime there. More recently, I heard in New Orleans, I think, a 2-year-old shot in the face and killed by someone here illegally. And again, it's not like these crimes are, not like that crime's worse because it's someone here illegally than if it was a United States citizen. What it does make it, in my opinion, is unnecessary because that person should not have been here, right? If you have a rat problem in your house and your neighbor up the street comes down and says, I'd like to help you out because I've got 30 rats that I don't need, would you take those rats and consider that a help? I think what you would say to your neighbor is, I appreciate the offer of your free rats. I have my own rat problem here. We have our own problem in this country with people who break the law egregiously, who are citizens. So why would we want or expect to tolerate all these violent crimes from people who shouldn't even be here? It's horrific. And I'll tell you what, this is not new. In May of 2005, a woman named Wendy Nagel, Westchester County, New York, had just sent her husband Dan off to work with their son who was in 3rd grade and their daughter who was off to kindergarten. They had hired a local company to power wash their deck. A man named Douglas Herrera showed up, illegal immigrant, had multiple warrants out for his arrest in New Jersey, which had not been acted upon. He entered the house, he raped and murdered her, and then he took her cell phone and began calling all her contacts. Her mother, her sister, her cousins, and boasting about what he had just done to her, sharing gruesome details. That's how her family found out what had happened to her. Again, this was in 2005, 19 years ago. To his credit, Bill O'Reilly was the only major news journalist, outlet, whatever, who covered this story. He covered it heavily. That story was particularly powerful for me because I knew Wendy and Dan. She was a cousin to my former in-laws in North New Jersey. We were actually on vacation when my late and former father-in-law got the phone call from a family member about what had happened to her. And I remember saying then and thinking then about this guy, Douglas Herrera, is that he was lucky the police caught him before my North Jersey Italian relatives did. Because I was there and heard the conversation, and I can tell you that a dispatch was made on that phone call. Douglas Herrera considers himself lucky that the police found him before the Sopranos did. I had been at their wedding, these two people. Didn't know them well, not close, but a peripheral relationship that really hit home. And again, was there to power wash their deck. Dan had just left with their 2 young kids. He entered the house. She was actually on the phone with her sister, and she said, I have to go. The guy that's washing my deck is knocking at the door. And that was the last time anyone ever heard from Wendy Nagel. And we're expected to tolerate that as American citizens, taxpayers, people who generally follow the law, follow the rules. And so my point in bringing that up, and aside from the fact that this is not new, the world should have stopped in 2005 when that happened to Wendy Nagel, the world should have stopped and said, no more. Unacceptable. Like I said, Bill O'Reilly, the only one that covered that story, and he gave it heavy coverage. If you talk about that these days, you're a racist. It's absurd. I didn't create the situation where these people that are named in these things all happen to have names that end with a vowel. And I'm of Italian descent, so I can make that joke. Sorry. God knows the Italians have put up with their share. In July of 2015, and everybody knows this story unless you've been living under a rock, Kate Steinle, beautiful young woman walking along Pier 14 in San Francisco, had just had lunch with her dad, arm in arm, shot in the head by Juan Garcia Zarate, an illegal who was here and had been deported 5 times and yet was back in the country. It's ironic because in his testimony when he went to trial, he said that he had just found the gun moments before that. And of course, we all know how many times you've tripped over a loaded firearm. I mean, God, I can't cross the street without having a loaded firearm laying in front of me that I just accidentally found. Amazingly, his testimony was that he was aiming at a baby seal and he accidentally hit Kate Steinle in the head. The irony there is San Francisco, if he had killed the baby seal, he'd still be in jail. And that's not even a joke. I honestly believe if he had killed the baby seal, he'd still be in jail. Instead, what happened to him is all the charges against him were dropped, with the exception of a felony gun charge that was later dropped. I watched an interview on Bill O'Reilly with Kate Steinle's parents, and I remember it vividly because I wept when her dad said to Bill O'Reilly, his daughter's last words to him, "Please help me, Dad," as she died in his arms. That's not gratuitous. That's verbatim from an interview that Bill O'Reilly did with Kate Steinle's parents. Anyone here who's a parent, who has kids, and can listen to that story? And again, Bill O'Reilly, and this show is not all about Bill O'Reilly. There's plenty of things about Bill O'Reilly I disagree with, but I do give him credit when he stood alone in times like this. And then he went further and he tried to get a law passed called Kate's Law. And Mitch McConnell made sure that that didn't happen. The turtle, who thank God is going in November. It's pathetic. There's a law that says if you have been deported and returned to this country and you commit a violent crime, a murder, I think it was 25 years mandatory. That seems fair to me. That seems fair to me. And again, I go back to Wendy Nagel. The world should have stopped decent people. The world should have stopped that day when Kate Steinle died in her father's arms. It's just stunning. And again, it's not about race or skin color or ethnicity. It's not. It's about common sense, pragmatism. Why should the rest of us have to tolerate this? Other countries' criminals. God, it's stunning. Where's the equity in these deaths? This ridiculous party, it talks about equity all the time. They wouldn't know it if they sat on it like a sharp tack. And here we are now. There's a veritable ocean of these similar stories. And you have to remember, Lakin Riley, Wendy Nagel, Kate Steinle, these are the ones that for whatever reason make the news and become headlines. And I honestly don't even know what that dynamic is. that separates these stories. I'm grateful that every now and then one of these stories takes on a life of its own, because it should. But there are tens of thousands of these events that have happened over the last 20 plus years in this country. People have lost children, mothers, dads, sisters, brothers for no reason. Can you imagine this family in Georgia losing your daughter over such a senseless, ridiculous event? And normally I might say that the people who are saying Joe Biden has blood on his hands, normally I might recoil from that a bit, but no longer. Joe Biden and everyone who votes for him and supports these open borders all have blood on their hands and should be ashamed of themselves. It's unlikely that I'm going to change any minds here. Folks are dug in. I don't believe there's a logical argument to be made in favor of open borders. I think immigration is fantastic. Do it legally. Come here. Fly the American flag. Assimilate to our culture. Or don't come. That's how it is in every other country in the world. Just amazing. Think an America could go to China and sneak in and start murdering young children over there? Try it. Let me know how that works out for you. Sorry to be on such a grim note today, but it had to be, and I'm going to try not to make that a habit, because I want this to be fun, and I want it to be enlightening, and I want it to, as I've said at the very beginning in the first episode, I want logic to be the underpinning of this. But this latest thing, and everybody knows this is all over the news, as it should be, this whole Lakin Riley thing, I think it warranted pumping the brakes and for people to talk about it and try to understand it and figure out what we have to do to keep this from happening again. Really appreciate you folks tuning in. I ask you, I hate to do it, but I ask you hit the like and subscribe button. We want to spread the word here. That really helps us out if you do that. Until next week, keep the blue side up.